Hey folks, it's Mr. Fingland here, getting ready for some AP workup of Their Eyes Were Watching God, which we're reading in conjunction with Kate Chopin's The Awakening. All right, two texts with powerful female protagonists that certainly are beneficial. It's beneficial, I think, to read these two together. All right. So the Eyes Were Watching God, great piece. At this point, if you've read some of The Awakening, that's wonderful. Try to do a couple of chapters of The Awakening and a couple of chapters of Their Eyes Were Watching God, and sort of see how these women's life stories and the events of the plots have parallels and deviate and so on and so forth. It's really quite a fascinating study. We're really trying to look at that essential question of what makes a Bildungsroman, right? What makes a coming-of-age novel. And so let's have a little look at chapters 1 and 2 in Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Right? First, I just want to share this first paragraph. Of course, looking at the way a writer introduces a text, that's really important. Let's read this fascinating imagery, this fascinating metaphor that's going on here. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember, and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. Really interesting, way of talking about men and women there in the first and second paragraph. The differing perspectives. The watcher, notice the W of watcher is capitalized in that first paragraph. And that's something to think about. Traditionally, authors capitalize a name if it's supposed to be a more grand being, right? Like God is usually capitalized. So that's something to think about. But the imagery of the horizon, of something people are always ambitious to try to reach, but you can never get there, that's an interesting thing to think about. And that idea, the difference between how men see ambition in the future and women, that's an interesting way to look at it. At any rate, if you've read chapter 1 at this point, and I encourage you to do that before these little tutorials, and you can certainly, or you can do them after, but it's better if you have your own impressions first, and feel free to mark up that book in any way you want. But let's talk a little bit about chapter 1. Chapter 1 of Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God is very much beginning at the end, right? So the protagonist of our piece, Janie Starks, dressed in overalls, right? Is returning home, right? She's walking home to this place where she's not been in a while, and I think that's what you gather, because the people who are on the porch next door to her house are sort of astounded to see her. They did not expect to see her, right? What I'd like to let's look at the bottom paragraph of chapter 1, page 1. I just love the description of these people who were watching her come home. The people all saw her come because it was sundown. The sun was gone, but he had left his footprints in the sky. It was the time for sitting on porches beside the road. It was the time to hear things and talk. These sitters had been tongueless, earless, eyeless conveniences all day long. Mules and other brutes had occupied their skins. But now the sun and the boss man were gone, so the skins felt powerful and human. They became lords of sounds and lesser things. They passed nations through their mouths. They sat in judgment. Right? So this book, in that first chapter, is sort of giving us a sense of power, right? The idea of what it is to be human and what it is just to be a skin, right? To be a convenience, right? So I guess you get the sense that these people who are looking at Janie Starks come home traditionally have looked at her in envy, and we get that in the next few pages, right? They traditionally envy her, but now they're sort of lording it over her, right? And you get the sense they do that more because their lives themselves are really rough lives. They don't have a lot of power. They don't have a lot of stuff to say. People don't listen to them. And so this is sort of like a little hierarchy of a town, right? Or the hierarchy in the town is is sort of upended because you get the impression that Janie was up top and now they're sort of judging her, right? They have a lot of interesting stuff to say, right? As you read through chapter 1. I think the big thing, of course, is that they want to know where this guy named Tea Cake is, right? And Tea Cake, that's a great name, not his given name. His real name is Virgil Woods, and we'll meet him later on in the plot. But it seems like the allegations are that he was a young man who ran off with this older woman. Janie Starks is characterized as someone in her 40s, right? So there are a lot of gossip, a lot of interesting things being said, but most of them along the lines of like, I bet he's run away with her money, right? So there's a little bit of juiciness going on, in this first chapter. And her good friend Phoebe Watson shows up with some food for her, right, and wants to get the real story. And the real story is that this man named Tea Cake, the love of Janie's life, has been killed, and that's why Janie's come back. So right from the beginning of this piece, we have this sense of loss, right, that this woman is coming back in mourning, and she's sort of starting again, maybe in a way, or maybe fulfilling some cycle of life. So that's really an interesting way of looking at this piece. An interesting way to start a piece is with the ending. Hey, that being said, if we turn to chapter 2, right, a lot of things happen in chapter 2. It's really sort of now really going back to Janie's beginning, her first consciousness, right, where we start hearing what it was like to be a little girl growing up, and realizing it. Like one of the first stories is how she didn't realize that she was colored. She didn't realize the color of her skin until she saw herself in a photograph, and was quite disappointed in it, right? So really, obviously this is a book about race to some extent, and the experience of, an African-American woman growing up, and so on and so forth in the early 20th century. But that idea of race, of course, is perpetuated as we get into chapter 2, right, where Janie experiences, in her teenage years, a sort of awakening of her own, a sexual awakening, right? Not to make it too fine a point on it. But at any point, she's suddenly attracted to, she finds herself as part of nature. She's attracted to this guy who otherwise she wouldn't bat an eyelid at, but now suddenly she's kissing him over the fence. And her grandmother, who is Janie's primary caretaker, sees Janie kissing this guy and is like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about this? Right? The beautiful backstory of this, of course, is that Janie's grandmother, who's taking care of her, she was born into slavery, right? And actually Janie's mother, who we hear a little bit about what happened to her, unfortunately, at the end of this chapter, Janie's mother was the daughter of the plantation owner, right? So a whole lot of pain and the sad depravity of slavery in the United States is definitely very much a part of this book, right? So we learn a bit of what happened to Janie's mother, and of course the grandmother doesn't know what to do, right? Her daughter, has become a woman, and she's desperately afraid of not getting her into a good situation, and so she ends up telling her to marry this perfect guy named Logan Killix. And of course, Logan is ancient, right? Like Janie's 16 years old, and Logan Killix, this really old guy, has been asking about her for ages. And Janie's like, I'm going to get them married off, right? Horror, right? I mean, to anyone, it just sounds absolutely awful. But of course, Janie's grandmother is someone who grew up without stability, and this Logan Killix guy, he's stable. He's a landowner. He's got things going. He seems like a good choice for Janie, right? So that's sort of the drama of chapter 2. Her earliest years being married off to this man who's a very old man by most of our standards, just generally speaking, right? So the little moment I'd like to share with you. If you just turn to page 19, bottom of 19, all right, and of course you've noticed that this piece is written in what I would describe as Black English vernacular. It's phonetically spoken to reflect the intonations of accent, right? Some beautiful language. If you're reading this and getting confused by it, it helps to read it aloud and get that sense of it. But I just love the this description of Janie's grandmother, bottom of 19, talking to Janie about like having raised her and trying to do her best. And Janie, maybe it wasn't much, but I done the best I can by you, and raked and scraped and bought this little piece of land so you wouldn't have to stay in the white folks' yard and tuck your head before other children at school. That was all right when you was little, but when you got big enough to understand things, I wanted you to look up on yourself, and don't want your feathers always crumpled by folks throwing up things in your face. And I can't die easy, thinking maybe the men folks, white or black, is making a spit cup out of you. Have some sympathy for me. Put me down easy, Janie. I'm a cracked plate. Right. So I just love that cracked plate metaphor. We get at the end, right? Janie's grandmother's basically saying, I just wanted the best I could for you. This guy, Logan Killix, he's the best I can do, and that.